Hello, my name is Dr. Anna Merrill, and I'm a psychologist at CRG. Today, this webinar is going to be about tips for helping your child have a good night's sleep. And this is something that is a priority for all families, for all parents. How do we make sure that our child is getting a good night's sleep? And when sleep is disrupted, this can lead to a lot of issues. So let's go ahead and get started. First, we want to think about how much sleep is actually recommended. So as I'm sure you know, depending on your age, actually that changes the recommendations for how much sleep we should each get per night. So obviously younger children, infants, toddlers need a large amount of sleep each day. As we get older into the preschool, elementary, and teenage years, slightly less sleep. So 3 to 5 year olds, 10 to 13 hours a night is typically recommended. 6 to 13 years old, we recommend between 9 and 11 hours of sleep. And 14 to 18 year olds, around 8 to 10 hours of sleep. And then into adulthood, we're typically recommending between 7 and 9 hours of sleep. So why is sleep so important? When it comes to sleep, as I'm sure you know, there are different stages of sleep, and each stage of sleep is important as we work to walk through the cycles that allow our brain to repair itself while we're sleeping. We can talk about sleeping actually as like a laundry cycle for the brain, okay? So while you're sleeping, you're moving through your stages of sleep. It takes about 90 minutes to walk through a full sleep cycle. And across that 90 minutes, what your brain is doing is moving through these stages that are actually helping to basically clean itself. There's actually research that shows that that's what the brain is doing while we sleep. And what that then allows for is for our brain to really reset. And when we wake up in the morning, if we've successfully moved through the cycles of sleep, then we feel refreshed, our cognitive functioning is better, our emotional processing is better, and this is why sleep is so important. It's also why if sleep is disrupted, if we're awoken during the stages of sleep, if we're not completing these cycles of sleep, that we notice that we're not functioning as well as we'd like to in the morning. So we've all had those nights where you have a bad night of sleep and you feel groggy in the morning or you're cranky, and you might notice this in your child as well. If they're waking up frequently throughout the night, they're not getting enough sleep, then they might be having difficulty focusing, difficulty controlling their emotions, and that actually can be connected to the fact that they didn't get a good night's sleep. So what can we do about it? First thing to think about is actually what we're doing during the day that's actually going to support having a better night's sleep. So thinking about how we're structuring our child's day so that when it is time to go to bed, they're going to be ready. So things to think about. Exposure to sunlight, right? So it keeps our biological clock working the way it's supposed to. If in the morning we're getting exposure to sunlight, going outside, particularly in the morning. In the afternoon, we want to make sure that we're getting physical activity, either in the morning or in the early afternoon. We want to avoid having a lot of physical activity right before bed because that can actually get us more awake and make it harder to go to sleep. So typically bike rides, walking, playing outside in the yard, in the backyard, that's going to be best left for in the morning or early afternoon. We also want to avoid caffeine in the several hours before bed. So thinking, obviously, we know that caffeine is in coffee or tea, but even soda or chocolate, so those desserts and things like that, several hours before bed, we want to make sure we're not giving our child anything with caffeine in it, because caffeine can make it harder for us to fall asleep. And for some children, bedwetting can also be an issue, or the sensation of feeling like you have to go to the bathroom can wake you up in the middle of the night. So we also want to reduce fluid intake before bed. So avoid giving your child a lot to drink right before bed if possible. The most important part is establishing a regular bedtime routine. So during the day, there's things we can do to support sleep, but when it comes time to bedtime, we want to have a consistent routine. And it can be really hard to keep a routine every day of the week, but if possible, it's really helpful. So even on the weekends, as much as you can stick with that routine, it's going to be helpful for your child to have more consistent sleep. Things to think about. 1 hour before bedtime, that's when we want to start to avoid exercise, video games, time on the tablet, time watching TV, or any other stimulating activities that are going to keep your child awake and activated. What we do want to start doing 1 hour before bedtime is the time when we start calming ourselves, engaging in relaxing activities. So this might be a time where we're listening to softer and calm music. Maybe we're reading stories, engaging in quiet types of play that's non-stimulating. For older kids, it might be doing things like word searches or word type games. And for some people, it can actually be really helpful to engage in some mindfulness or relaxation activities. So things like meditation, walking through deep breaths, visual imagery. These can be helpful activities to help your child to be able to slow down and get ready for sleep. And a lot of parents can feel intimidated about how to walk their child through these types of activities, but there are tons of resources out there online. So there's apps, YouTube videos and things like that, meditation for sleep, mindfulness activities for children, things like Headspace. There's an app called The Smiling Mind. There's an app called Sleep Meditations for Kids. That's just a few of many options that are out there that might work for you and your family. So feel free to use some of those resources that are out there so that you don't have to come up with these things on your own. And when we think about how we're promoting good sleep hygiene, there's some other things that we want to keep in mind. First and foremost, as much as you can, we want your child's bed to be associated with sleeping. So if there's a strong association between when I'm in my bed, this is when I go to sleep, it helps to promote being able to fall asleep easier. So that means that if you're using the bed primarily just for sleeping and not for other activities, this can really help. So don't necessarily allow your child to play with their Legos in the bed or have long amounts of tablet time in their bed. Let's do that somewhere else. Let's do that in the living room. Let's do that in another common living space in the home, in the kitchen, but try to avoid having that happen in their bed. We also want to think about how we're setting up the child's room. So creating a really cozy room that's cool, quiet, and comfortable. Those are the 3 areas that we want to focus on: the right temperature, quiet from distractions, and comfortable and cozy for whatever works for your child. Maybe that's certain type of blanket or pillow, maybe that's certain stuffed animals that they need to have with them, but let's make sure they feel comfortable when they're in their room going to sleep. Distracting noise can be an issue for a lot of children, so you might consider using a fan or a white noise machine or some sort of humidifier to drown out that type of noise so that your child can more easily fall asleep as well. Another thing that comes up is for some children, there's some anxiety around what time it is, how much sleep are they going to get, are they waking up and where's mom or dad, because based on what time it is and things like that. So if your child has any amount of anxiety around time, if they do have a clock in their room, when it's time for bed, it can actually be helpful to move the clock, turn it around so that they can't actually see the time. They're not over focusing on the clock. So you may consider that as well if they have that tendency to stare at the clock. The other thing we want to think about is when it's actually time to go to bed. Hopefully we've established a good bedtime routine, but we also want to make sure as much as possible that we're walking through that routine before the child actually falls asleep. So it's best to put your child to sleep when they're drowsy, but when they're still awake, rather than they fall asleep on the couch and we're carrying them to their bed. Once again, the reason for that is we want a strong association between you go to your bed and you fall asleep. So when you notice that your child's drowsy before they fall asleep, that's the best time to walk through that bedtime routine and get them in their bed. We don't want them falling asleep in other places. It can also be really helpful to use some sort of security item that can help transition your child to bed. So maybe they get access to that favorite blanket or stuffed animal or doll when it's bedtime, and that comes with them as they make their way to their bed, and it helps them to transition to falling asleep. So an item can also really help create that association between I'm awake and now, oh, it's time for me to go to bed. When it comes to checking in with your child, it's also important that if you are going to be checking in after they've gone to sleep, that you keep those check-ins short and sweet. This can be helpful for some children. It lets them know that you're still there, you're in the house, they're safe, they can go to sleep, but you don't want to be engaging with the child or inadvertently waking them up when they're about to fall asleep. So a brief check-in is fine, but keep it short and sweet. Many children who have anxiety often start to feel some of that anxiety and think about some of those worries before bed. It's not uncommon for children to want to talk about their anxiety when it's time to go down for bed. So I absolutely think that it is fine to allow your child to release some of that anxiety and talk it out before it's time for bed. However, we want to make sure that we don't allow this to go on and on and on and actually create more anxiety, making it harder for them to fall asleep. So I encourage what I like to call positive pillow talk, okay? So absolutely listen and validate your child's concerns. Reflect back to them what you hear them saying. They're worried about when mommy leaves for work. They're worried about grandma and her health, whatever it might be that they're worried about. I hear you. That can be really scary to think about that. However, it is also okay to put boundaries around how much they're allowed to talk about their worries. So, for example, it can be helpful to say, why don't you tell me about 2 things that were worrying you today or that are on your mind right now? And once they've told you 1, they've told you 2, okay, now we're done. And then we want to try to end on a more positive note. So redirect your child's thought process to something more positive and try to avoid negotiating. It is not uncommon for a child during this bedtime to say, Mommy, can you just stay with me a little longer? Can't you just sleep in the bed with me? Can't we just talk a little bit longer? Can we read one more story? It's really helpful if you've established a routine that you stick with the routine and walk through it. And what we know is that sticking to that routine actually reduces the anxiety that the child is feeling. If they know exactly how it's going to go every night and you do it the same way every night, they're actually going to be less anxious. If you encourage more anxious talk and more negotiation, now the child might actually experience more anxiety. So how can you end on a positive note? Maybe you're also setting boundaries. Now let's talk about 2 things that happened today that were really fun. Or let's talk about one really fun thing we're going to do tomorrow. And now your child's ending on that positive thought process, which is ideally going to help make it easier for them to fall asleep. So stick to the routine, allow for some positive pillow talk, and it's okay to redirect your child's thoughts and to not support them being stuck on the cycle of worrying and worrying and worrying. I hope that these tips have been helpful when you think about what can help to put your child to bed more easily. And maybe some of these things might actually apply for you as well, because many adults also struggle with falling asleep each night. A routine for everyone is going to help them to fall asleep better. CRG is still available in the time of the current pandemic, providing telepsychology services. This includes therapy appointments, testing and assessment services, as well as our med management services. So please feel free to reach out to us at the contact information listed here or go onto our website, childrensresourcegroup.com. There's tons of information and resources on there. We are currently seeing our existing patients as well as new patients to CRG. So we hope that you contact us if there's anything we can help you with, whether that's sleep or other challenges you may be having. We're here for you, and we want to be available to help you work through this time as well as we transition into summer and our new normal. So please feel free to contact us, and thank you for your time.